And I want to say greetings to each and every one of you, Aquaba, and welcome. Welcome to another round of the Conscious Raster Report here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, here on livinginblack.com. Weekday morning, you and I get together live. We come at you from 9 a.m. Pacific time. It's 12 noon Eastern time, 11 a.m. Central time, 5 p.m. BST, and 8 p.m. East Africa time. We get together with you. 7 p.m. East Africa time, we get together with you and we deal with culture, consciousness, historical perspectives. We deal with entertainment, economics, education, health, labor, law, history, all areas of human interactivity and development. Today's date is Monday, the 23rd day of June, Monday, June 23rd. Welcome to the 7th millennium. You have found your family in a peaceful place. That is the year 6265 in the Kemetic calendar. And welcome to you all. This is a good day here in LIB Radio. As Ice Cube would say, today was a great day. I didn't even have to use my AK. Or are we using our AK as we are coming out firing from the hip on LIB Radio today? I want to talk to you about his story versus our story versus the story. So welcome. Let's do this thing. Let's do it accurately. Today on LIB Radio, the topic is Tutmose III in the 18th Dynastic period. This is ancient. He is ancient Egyptians' Napoleon, where I say he would be the model by which Napoleon would want to have lived. Today on LIB Radio, it is said, until the lion becomes a historian, the tale of the hunt will always reflect the glory on the hunter. Today, we know so much more about our ancient history. We share a fantastic story today of true Kemetic accomplishment that has been stolen and distorted by the hunter. As we reclaim our story, we restore our glorious history as a great and mighty people. So let's go into the story. I was looking at, and let me be clear with you right off the bat. I consider the Bible to be grossly distorted. I also consider the Bible to be written by outsiders who didn't understand what was going on or misinterpreted or just lied about everything. I consider the book of Exodus to be a complete and total fabrication. I'll be honest with you right off the bat. So for my Christian brothers and sisters, please listen very closely today because you may hear me slip up. You may hear me slip up, and you may want to step up and correct me. If you want to correct me, if you're a Christian, you believe the Bible, you believe Exodus, the book of Exodus, if you believe the Moses story and the Exodus and all of that, you are invited to be my guest on LIB Radio. I'll let you know right off the bat. You can text me at 702-580-0662. Today, I am going to do the best that I can to dismantle a broad fabric of lies about ancient Egypt. And to do so, I'm going to focus in on one character, and that is the Pharaoh Tutmose III. And we're going to focus on the 18th dynastic period, and we're going to focus on how Tutmose III conquered so-called Canaan, or Western Asia, the Fertile Crescent. Tutmose III, 18th dynastic period of the New Kingdom. Here is a brief explanation of Tutmose III. Tutmose III, often called the, quote, Napoleon of Egypt, was the sixth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty during the New Kingdom, circa 1479 to 1425 before the Common Era. Initially co-regent with his stepmother and aunt Hatshepsut, he ascended as sole ruler after her death, marking a reign of military brilliance and administrative innovation. Now, I will say I did get a chance to travel to Egypt once in my lifetime, spent 15 days there, and we got a chance to travel quite a bit. And we did go to Hatshepsut's temple. That was a wonderful, wonderful experience. We'll talk about that another time. His leadership marked one of ancient Egypt's greatest periods of expansion. Tutmose III conducted at least 17 military campaigns, most famously the Battle of Megiddo, establishing Egyptian dominance from Nubia in the south to the Euphrates in the north. His use of organized logistics, chariotry, and detailed battlefield strategy reflects one of the earliest examples of sophisticated imperial warfare. Now, again, he conquered and dominated from Nubia, which is at the Sudanese border, to the southern Egyptian border, Sudan, modern-day Sudan. He conquered from Nubia up to the Tigris and Euphrates River, which would be modern-day Iraq or ancient Mesopotamia. That included all of Canaan, etc., etc. Beyond his battlefield accomplishments, Tutmose III was a visionary state builder. He initiated vast building projects throughout Egypt, including additions to the Karnak temple complex, where his victories were inscribed on the walls of the annals of Tutmose III. These texts not only glorify his campaigns, but also provide insight into the spoils of war, diplomatic alliances, and Egypt's bureaucratic structure. Culturally, his reign cultivated scientific and artistic advancements. Botanical specimens from his campaigns were brought to Egypt and planted in temple gardens, showing an early form of scientific curiosity and environmental adaptation. Tutmose III's reign embodies the height of pharaonic power, where divine kingship fused with effective statecraft and military prowess. His legacy sets a benchmark for later rulers and demonstrated how centralized control, religious authority, and military innovation could fuel an empire's rise. Now, I'm going to go into that a little bit more, but let me do this. Let me share with you a little piece of video that I have queued up over here that I think does an excellent job of putting this all into context of who is Tutmose III and why do we who know about ancient Kemet, why do we so venerate this great name of Tutmose III? Further, I will give you a hint. Tutmose III's image has been uh, stolen. The story of his battlefield accomplishments have been grossly distorted. And further, people of Hebrew, claiming Hebrew, people claiming Hebrew, the so-called Jews, have distorted the story completely. The story of Moses III has been turned into Moses and tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. This is a mess. It's a big effing mess. We're going to do the best we can to set the story straight. To my Christian brothers and sisters, I love you. I love you dearly. But if you keep holding on to that story of Pharaoh, let my people go, you are a mental slave of the enemy. Quite simply, you are a mental slave of the enemy. I can't put it any more succinct than that. Let's do the best we can to tell the story to the best of our abilities so that you and I do not have to look so stupid. I say greetings to my family tuning in today. For Africa One, Hotep, Brother Kitty, and the global LIV family, Hotep to you. I know, my beloved sister, you are going to love this following presentation. It's a short video. I'm going to share it with you, and then we're going to come back, and we are then going to begin to tell the complete story of Tutmosis III, the 18th Dynasty. We will talk about Hatshepsut because she's very significant in history. And then we're going to debunk the myth of the Exodus, the myth of the Jews crossing the Sinai Desert for 40 years. It's complete and total myth. I think most of us know it by now. Historians know it by now, but it still persists. So let's debunk this story. First, let's go to ancient Egypt. I'm going to show you a piece of a video, and I'll put the video up in the link. It's called Ancient Egypt, the New Empire. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Part 3. See you in history. Let's begin that tale right now.
Diplomatic ties with their neighbors. Military campaigns, led by Pharaoh Tutmose I, led to the conquest of new lands, guaranteeing the dominance of Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. Tutmose I ordered new constructions in several cities and elaborated new works of art, among them a stela, where his achievements as a ruler were recorded. His successors maintained territorial control, fighting rebellions in the conquered lands. His grandson Tutmose III was considered one of the most important pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Tutmose III had a great military activity, with more than 17 campaigns, and maintained his grandfather's building momentum. During the reign of Tutmose III, there was a revolt in Canaan. The Canaanites were led by the king of the city of Kadesh and assembled troops to expel the Egyptians from their territories. This dispute originated the famous Battle of Megiddo, which has enormous archaeological importance. It was the first battle to be recorded and detailed in writing in history. The Egyptians described the details of the battle on the walls of the temple of Amun-Ra, which today is in the city of Luxor, the ancient Thebes. Tutmose III gathered his army and fought against the rebels in a plain. His victory caused the Canaanites to retreat into the city of Megiddo on top of a hill. The battle ended after Megiddo was besieged for 7 months, which led to the surrender of the city. Also in the Battle of Megiddo was used for the first time the compound bow, a more effective version than the bows used previously. The victory was very profitable for the Egyptians. According to the reports, they captured 894 war chariots, 2 of them covered in gold, and 2,000 horses. After this victory and subsequent conquest of the territories, Egypt reached its peak. Its territorial domination started at the Euphrates River in Syria and went to Napata in the Kushite territory. Tutmose III still attacked the kingdom of Mitanni that belonged to the Horites. He won again and annexed new lands to Egypt and a new contingent of captured soldiers. Tutmose III is believed to have visited the Greek city of Crete, probably the first pharaoh of Upper Egypt to travel by sea and visit a foreign nation.
In other news, Massachusetts residents.
All right, I think that is all we're going to share of that here. Let me just double check. I'm going to take this commercial out and let's see if we can, is there's more to this story from the commercial forward. And I'm going to turn my audio back on. And let's see.
But not everything went well for the Egyptians during the New Kingdom. A turbulent period erupted when a new pharaoh took the throne. Pharaoh Akhenaten was one.
Okay. All right. That's enough. I'm going to share with that. And we're going to go into the story. We're going to tell more of the story of Tutmose III. Akhenaten is a very important character, but it's not this story of Tutmose III. Secondly, I'm going to add to the stage another screen. This other screen I'm going to add is actually, bear with me. I'm going to add this screen to the stage. And this is the story of Tutmose III at the Battle of Megiddo. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my notes because my notes went a little bit beyond this particular story of Tutmose III at the Battle of Megiddo. So let me just come back over here. Tutmose III, he's the architect of Egypt's new kingdom zenith. Now, this new kingdom comes after the first interim period. This is between the old kingdom, the new kingdom. There is the interim period where Egypt essentially, or ancient Kemet, collapsed on itself. A lot of would-be pretenders to the pharaonic throne popped up, and they imposed themselves. They made temples to themselves. They made images of themselves, but it pretty much scattered. So it comes back to the new kingdom, which is consolidated with, I believe, Ramses II. Don't quote me on that. Maybe I'll get it correct here in a second. Ramses II may have been the one that consolidated the new kingdom. So born around 1504, before the Common Era, Tutmose III ascended as co-regent alongside his stepmother Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut. That's it. Hatshepsut. At the dawn of the 18th Dynasty. So it could be very well likely that Hatshepsut represents the dawn of the 18th Dynasty. That could be. I'll continue. For the first 2 decades, he ruled in her shadow, focusing on priestly duties and palace administration. At Hatshepsut's death, circa 1458 before the Common Era, he claimed full pharaonic authority and embarked on an era defined by military genius, bureaucratic overhaul, and monumental building. Military mastery and imperial reach over a 42-year reign, circa 1479 before the Common Era to 1425. Tutmose III led at least 17 major campaigns. His signature victory at Megiddo pioneered coordinated chariot strikes, rapid marches through rugged terrain, and systematic supply lines, elements later echoed by generals millennia on. He subdued Canaanite city-states, forced Syrian rulers into vassalage, and extended Egypt's southern border deep into Nubia. Conquered elites were brought to Thebes in chains. Funerary goods and exotic plants filled the royal treasuries, and tribute caravans flowed into the Nile Valley. Statecraft, religion, and monumentality back home. Tutmose III redefined pharaonic administration. He installed provincial governors whose careers hinged on performance, standardized temple endowments, and codified a taxation system that funneled wealth into royal building projects. His additions to Karnak, especially the festival hall and vast hypostyle court, celebrate each campaign with carved battle lists and victory annals. Beyond stone, he imported cedar and incense trees from Lebanon, creating North Egyptian botanical gardens that focus as living trophies and research nurseries. The cultural and legacy memory of Tutmosis III. Tutmosis III's tomb KV34 broke tradition with a winding corridor inscribed in ivory yellow hieroglyphs, reflecting cosmic journeys in the underworld. In later years, he systematically chiseled out Hatshepsut's royal cartouches, a complex blend of sibling rivalry and posthumous propaganda. His model of combined religious patronage, efficient bureaucracy, and relentless military advance set the standard for Ramses II and every Egyptian ruler who followed. So that did correct me. Ramses II does not precede Tutmosis III. He supersedes him. He comes after Tutmosis III. Ramses II is considered by many historians to be the greatest of all Egyptian or Kemetic pharaonic leaders. So corrected, I stand corrected. Now let's go into Tutmosis III at the Battle of Megiddo. And that's the second page that I have saved over here. And I'm going to share it with each and every one of you. Bear with me. This is well worth waiting for. And I hope you are enjoying the conversation. If you are enjoying today's conversation, can you drop a note? Can you share a word that says, Kitty, I like it? This is very important for us as people of African ascent to have in our minds, because this story of the Israeli Jews, which is itself hijacked, distorted, and the people they place them, the Europeans place themselves in ancient Egypt. They were not building the pyramids out of brick and stone. There was no evidence that the slaves built pyramids. There's no evidence of that. The best evidence says that those workers who built the pyramids lived a pretty high middle class existence. They had wonderful living quarters. They were fed very well. So you don't treat your slaves better than you treat the common people. So, I mean, I don't want to beat it to death, but we have to understand the distortion of history. It cannot stand. Let's do the best we can, you and I can do, to retell this story as accurate as possible. Here we go. Tutmosis III at the Battle of Megiddo. This article written by Joshua J. Mark. It appears at history, worldhistory.org. The ancient site of Megiddo was the scene of a number of battles in antiquity and is best known as the source of the word Armageddon, the Greek rendering of the Hebrew Har Megiddo, Mount of Megiddo, from the biblical book of Revelation 16:16. Again, it's now getting into distorted, crossing over history. Revelation 16:16 is the only use of the word in the Bible and designates the site of the final battle between the forces of the Christian God and those of his adversary, Satan. Megiddo, however, is mentioned at least 12 times in the Hebrew scriptures, the Christian Old Testament, concerning a number of military conflicts between the Israelites and various opponents. So, furthermore, this just goes to say, and I haven't gotten to the mentions of this in the ancient Egyptian, ancient Israeli text. But the New Testament is even worse. It's even worse. Let's go forward. Let's uncover as much of the story as we possibly can. Long before the Hebrew scribes wrote of these battles, however, Megiddo was already famous for an engagement involving a coalition of kings from Canaan and Syria in rebellion against the Pharaoh Tutmose III, 1458 to 1425 before the Common Era. Pharaoh Tutmose III of Kemet. Tutmose III was one of the greatest military strategists of ancient Egypt, who expanded the country's borders to establish the Egyptian empire and elevated his nation to the status of a superpower. Although the regions which became Kemetic provinces prospered under this arrangement, they still looked for opportunities to assert their independence and regain their autonomy. The Kemetic Empire, and I'm substituting every time they write the word, I say Kemetic. The Kemetic Empire was initiated by Amhos I, circa 1570 to 1544 before the Common Era, whose victory over the Hyksos of Lower Egypt marks the beginning of the period known as the New Kingdom of Egypt. Now, you have to understand, Lower Egypt does not mean geographically south. Lower Egypt means down the Nile. Lower Egypt is towards the Mediterranean. So his victory over the Hyksos of Lower Egypt marks the beginning of the period known as the New Kingdom, 1570 to 1069 before the Common Era. And every pharaoh who succeeded him maintained or enlarged the boundaries. Tutmosis III, however, would go further than any others. In 20 years, he led 17 successful military campaigns recorded on the walls of the temple of Amun at Karnak. But the most detailed account is of his first and most famous at Megiddo. The background to the battle. Tutmosis III was the son and successor of Tutmose II, 1492 to 1479, before the Common Era. But when his father died, he was only 3 years old. So his stepmother, Hatshepsut, 1479 to 1458 before the Common Era, held the throne as regent. Soon after assuming his position, however, Hatshepsut broke with tradition and assumed after assuming this position, not his position, soon after assuming this position, however, Hatshepsut broke with traditions and assumed power. Tutmose III spent his youth at the court of Thebes in military training and pursuing the kind of education expected for a prince of the new kingdom. And the term Thebes, I can replace that as well. Bear with me 1 second here. I'm going to copy. What is the name? Thebes. That's what I'm looking for. Thebes in ancient Egypt. No, ancient Kemet was called. And one quick inquiry. Thebes in ancient Kemet was known as Waset. Waset. Very important that we have these ancient Egyptian names, ancient Kemetic names, because Egypt, even Egypt itself, is the Greek name for Kemet. So Tutmosis III spent his youth at the court of Waset in military training and pursuing the kind of education expected for a prince of the new kingdom. After her first few years as pharaoh, Hatshepsut organized no major military campaigns but kept her forces at peak efficiency. And when he proved able, promoted Tutmose III to commander of her forces. She was one of the most powerful, resourceful, and efficient monarchs in ancient Egyptian history, Kemetic history. And when she died, she left Tutmosis III a prosperous country with a well-organized and highly trained fighting force. Hatshepsut had maintained the empire steadily throughout her reign. But when she died, the kings of Megiddo and Kadesh rebelled against her successor, whom they seemed to have believed was weak. It was actually fairly common in the ancient world for subject states to rise against a new ruler in order to take advantage of the transition of power to win their independence. It is possible, in fact, that Hatshepsut anticipated this, in that there seems to have been some evidence that Tutmosis III's first campaign had been commissioned by her. This claim is disputed, however. The coalition between the Canaanites of Megiddo and the Syrians of Kadesh attracted others dissatisfied with Egyptian rule, who gathered their forces outside the city of Megiddo in late 1458 or early 1457 before the Common Era. The Battle of Megiddo. Tutmose III wasted no time in mobilizing his forces and marching from Thebes toward the city. The army covered 150 miles in 10 days and rested at Gaza before moving on to the town of Yehem, where Tutmosis III halted to confer with his senior staff. There were 3 roads that they could take from the nearby town of Aruna to reach Megiddo, a narrow pass which would require the army to march in single file, and 2 other broader roads which would require the army to march, and 2 other broader roads which would enable faster and easier movement. The generals claimed that they had intelligence that the enemy was waiting for them at the end of the narrow pass, and further progress would be slow and difficult, with the vanguard reaching the battle site while the rear guard was still on the march. Tutmose listened to their counsel, but disagreed with their points. According to the record of the engagement kept by his military scribe, Chaneni, Tutmose III addressed his commanders, saying, "I swear, as Ra loves me, as my father Amun favors me, as my nostrils are rejuvenated with life and satisfaction, My majesty shall proceed upon this Aruna road. Let him of you who wishes to go upon these roads of which you speak, and let him of you who wishes to come in the following of my majesty, behold, they will say, these enemies whom Ra abominates has his majesty set out on another road because he has become afraid of us. So they will speak. And that was recorded from Pritchard, page 177 of his book. Going forward, the generals instantly bowed to his decision. And then Tutmose III addressed his army. He encouraged them to march swiftly on the narrow road and assured them that he himself would lead from the front, saying, I will not let my victorious army go forward ahead of my majesty in this place. The chariots and wagons were dismantled and carried, and the men led their horses single file through the pass to emerge in the Kina Valley by Megiddo. And this is a portrait here, or a picture here of Megiddo. This is modern day photograph, obviously, but it is an ancient city, Megiddo. They found no enemy waiting for them. And in fact, the coalition had assumed that Tutmose III would choose either of the easier routes and had troops prepared to defend at both locations. Tutmose III's decision to choose the more difficult path gave him the advantage of the element of surprise. I'm going to reread that sentence. Tutmose III's decision to choose the more difficult path gave him the advantage of the element of surprise. He could not attack at once, however, since the better part of his army was still strung along the Aruna Pass. It would take the rear guard over 7 hours of marching to catch up with their king. Tutmose III ordered the troops to rest and refresh themselves near the Kina Brook. Throughout the night, he personally received sentry reports and gave orders for the provisioning of the troops and their placement in battle for the following day. He positioned his army so that the southern wing was on a hill above the Kina Brook, and the northern wing on a rise to the northwest of Megiddo. The Chaldani's account reads, quote, His Majesty set forth in a chariot of fine gold, adorned with his accoutrements of combat, like Heru, the mighty of Amun, a lord, a mighty of arm, a lord of action like Mantu, the Theban, while his father Amun made strong his arms. Thereupon his majesty prevailed over them at the head of his army. Then they, the enemy, saw his majesty prevailing over them, and they fled headlong to Megiddo with their faces of fear. They abandoned their horses and their chariots of gold and silver, so that someone might draw them up into this town by hoisting on their garments. Now the people had shut this town against them, but they let down garments to hoist them up into this town. Chaldani's report notes, however, if the army had pursued the fleeing enemy across the field and cut them down in their flight, then the battle would have ended decisively that day. Instead, the soldiers, quote, gave up their hearts to capturing the possessions of the enemy, unquote, on the field, and allowed their opponents to not only reach the sanctuary of the city, but mount defenses. Tutmose III ordered a moat dug around Megiddo, and a stockade built around the moat. No one from inside the city was allowed out except to surrender or if called to parley by an Egyptian officer. The siege lasted at least 7, possibly 8 months before the leaders of the coalition surrendered the city. Tutmose III offered very generous terms, which amounted to a promise from his opponents that they would not raise another rebellion against Kemet. None of the ringleaders were executed, and the city was left untouched. Tutmose III did strip the ringleaders of their positions and appointed new officials loyal to Kemet in their place. He also took their children as hostages back to Egypt to guarantee their good behavior. Although this may sound harsh, the hostages were cared for and continued to live at the level of comfort they were used to. The children were educated in Egyptian culture, and when they came of age, were sent back to their lands in an appreciation for and loyalty to one Egyptian pharaoh. Now, I ask you, does that sound anything at all like the distorted story of Exodus that we've heard? That the Hebrews were carried off as slaves and built the pyramids as slaves out of brick and mud or mud bricks? No, that's not even close to being true. For Africa One is in the house. She writes, this is essential for anyone who considers themselves intelligent and well informed on their spiritual belief system. The truth shall make you free, quoting the book, the Bible, quoting John 8:32. I appreciate that. And I do agree with you 100%, my beloved sister. Let's continue to tell this fantastic story of ancient Kemet. So here we are back again. Bear with me. Where am I at? This is where I'm at. Okay, so let's continue to tell this tale. The siege, I read that whole thing. Again, I want to repeat the ones they carried away. They carried away the children. It said they also took their children as hostages back to Egypt to guarantee their good behavior. Although this may sound harsh, the hostages were cared for, and continued to live at the level of comfort that they were used to. That does not sound like any slaves. The children were educated in Kemetic culture, and when they came of age, were sent back to their lands with an appreciation for and loyalty to the Kemetic pharaoh, Tutmose III. The significance of the battle. This list of loot carried back to Kemet from the campaign included prisoners of war, slaves, hostages, arms, and armor. So they did carry slaves back to Kemet, arms and armor, gold and silver chariots, jewels and precious metal, and livestock. Would have been enough to mark it an overwhelming triumph. In addition to putting down the rebellion and enriching Kemet's treasury, however, the victory also gave Tutmosis III control over northern Canaan. That's all of Egypt. And provided him, or it's not all of Egypt, but all of modern day Israel, northern Canaan, and provided him with a base from which to launch campaigns into Mesopotamia. The great princes of the Mesopotamian cities, which had not joined the coalition sent to Egypt of their own accord to win favor with, and hopefully buy protection from the great warrior king and champion of the Battle of Megiddo, and his fame became legendary quite quickly. In the following years, Tutmosis III would conquer Syria and the lands of the Mitanni, both of whom had been involved in the Megiddo uprising, before turning his attention to the southern borders of Egypt to defeat the Nubians and expand Egypt's holdings in that region, expand Kemetic holdings in that region. As at Megiddo, he always relied on the element of surprise and was never deterred by the difficulties or obstacles to victory. His triumph over the coalition at Megiddo established his reputation early and assured that the success of all his future campaigns was all but certain, as the enemy would know in advance that they were facing an invincible opponent. And this pullout here says Tutmose III's triumph over the coalition at Megiddo established his reputation early and assured the successes of all of his future campaigns. And he conducted at least 17 campaigns. The battle most likely suggested itself to the writer of Revelation, in that the description of the forces of Satan and God in a biblical narrative are similar to those of the coalition and Tutmose III's army in the official inscription of Cha-Neni at Karnak. In both, the writers describe the victorious forces of good over the assembled coalition of evil. There can be little doubt that the scribe who wrote the biblical work was acquainted with the Battle of Megiddo, since the story of Tutmose III's great victory against the combined forces of his enemies remained well known for centuries afterwards. Now, I thought that was really quite excellent. And again, we're talking about this is taken from worldhistory.org. What do you think? What do you think? I know you have an opinion. I encourage you to share your opinion with your brother. We have been talking about Tutmose III and the Battle of Megiddo. It also talked a little bit about the procession of the 18th Dynasty. This really begins the period known as the 18th Dynasty, the New Kingdom of Egypt. I'm just going to take a little deviation, and I want to go there for 1 second. First of all, let me put up the link to what I was just reading. If I haven't already, I'm going to put up that link. This is Tutmose at the Battle of Megiddo, written by Joshua J. Mark. And I thought that Joshua J. Mark, personally, I thought he did an excellent job of telling that story. What do you think? I'm going to put up that link, and I'm going to put it on my Facebook page for those of you who want to tune in later and catch that story. And I'm also going to make sure it goes onto my YouTube page as well. Very important. So Facebook, I'm waiting for you to come up, and we have it there. Facebook, I'm going to tell the story right here. And that's not it. I'm going to tell the story right here. Is it? So let's do the best we can to unload this. Let's tell the story. And you correct me, Christian brothers and sisters, if you think anything that I said was incorrect, distorted, or fabricated. You have to understand something. You have been taught by people who were taught by people who were taught by people who stole the story and grossly distorted it. Stole a fantastic story, but grossly distorted it. And when the parts came in that didn't make them out to be heroes, they just either erased it, distorted it, flipped it, or fabricated it. Now you and I have to put these stories back together. I think we can. I don't know if we will, but it would sure be in our best interest to do so. Would you agree? Let's talk about the broader definition because this is for me an education. I completely agree. This is for me an education. Let's talk broader about the story of the new kingdom of Egypt. Now, this has this written here. There is an audio track of this available. This is again written by John J. Mark. Joshua, not John, Joshua J. Mark. So I'm going to put this on the desktop and I'm going to shrink me. And let's read this story, New Kingdom of Egypt. Definition of the new kingdom. Because we recently did a story here, and it was just a few days ago. I can't remember what the story was about, but we did talk about the old kingdom. In fact, I must have talked about this day before yesterday or so, talking about from my book, Standard Omission, the African Scientific Roots of Greco-Roman Medicine. And we talked about the old kingdom and the brilliant creativity that is assigned to the old kingdom. And then from there, we talked about the first interim period. I'm going to highly recommend this book. And I tell you, I'm almost tempted, almost, I'm not there yet, almost tempted to write a series of books on recovering ancient history and returning it to our own. I want you, anyone out there, if you're skeptical of me, and you have the right, maybe the responsibility to be skeptical as your point of embarkation. If you are skeptical of me, or if you, or whatever, I want you to ask an Egyptian, or an Israeli person, Israel. I want you to ask a Jew, who was the Pharaoh of the ancients? Of your story, the Exodus. That's what. Who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Now you know, and I know, that it was Tutmose III. We know it. So how did Tutmose declare war on Moses? It don't make no sense. But you formulate the question, if you can get them to be honest, they will probably not tell you the truth. My book, my intention right now, our attention is the new kingdom of Egypt. The new kingdom, circa 1570 before the Common Era to 1069 BCE, is the era in Egyptian history following the disunity of the second intermediate period. Now, there was the first intermediate period. Now there's a second intermediate period. I'm going to have to go back and look at that in context, but we're not going to do that today. And preceding the dissolution of the central government at the start of the third intermediate period, which is when the Greeks are, there's not when the Greeks are coming in. This period, I'll be honest with you, the third intermediate period is in my mind a blank. I did write the book, Living Superfood Research, which contained a chapter called The Spiritual Origins of the Vegetarian Lifestyle. Now, that one really takes us into the third intermediate period. But now that I understand it's distinct, I got to go back and I got to, no, actually, I did know that it was distinct when I wrote the book, but I do have to go back and fill in this period. So this would be a good place for doing it. Let me just open this up in a new tab, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Now, what I am going to do is share with you who are listening in today, tuning in today, what is the New Kingdom document. So this is a very important document for us to share. What is the New Kingdom? And I'll put this up on Facebook as well. Boom, shakalaka, boom, boom, boom. And I'm going to put it one more place here. What is the New Kingdom? And as I am doing that, I'm also going to put up this other document that I put in here. I'm going to put up just the link, not the research, just the link. Third intermediate period of Egypt. Okay, so bear with me. This is hopefully well worth waiting for. My computer got real slow. And we're moving as fast as I can. And one more comment, and I'm ready to go. Okay, now, what is the New Kingdom? Let's talk about it. The New Kingdom of Egypt. I read the first paragraph. It is the most popular era in Egyptian history in the present day, with the best known pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, such as Hatshepsut, Tutmose III, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, their child, those of the 19th dynasty like Seti I, Ramses the second, the great Ramses, and Merenptah of the 20th dynasty, such as Ramses III. It is during this new kingdom that these Egyptian rulers are known as pharaohs, meaning great house. The Greek word for the Egyptian per-ankh, or per-ah, but per-ankh is how we know it. The designation of the royal residence. Prior to the New Kingdom, Egyptian monarchs were simply known as kings and addressed as Your Majesty. The fact that the word Pharaoh is so common, used to reference any Egyptian ruler from any era, attests to the impact the New Kingdom has had on modern day understanding of Egyptian history. The New Kingdom is the most completely documented period in Egyptian history. Literacy has expanded during the Middle Kingdom, 2040 BC to 1792 before the Common Era, and Second Intermediate Period, so that by the time of the New Kingdom, more people were writing and sending letters. Further, Egypt was now, Kemet was now in contact with other foreign powers through diplomatic relations and trade, which necessitated writing contracts, treaties, letters between kings, and bills of sale. The operation of the empire was also required a large bureaucratic network, which of course generated a vast amount of written material, much of which is still extant. During the Second Intermediate Period, of foreign kings, known as the Hyksos, ruled in Lower Egypt from avarice. The first time outsiders had managed to amass the kind of wealth and power to enable them to become a political force in Kemet. The Hyksos were driven out. The Hyksos were driven out by Ahmose III, 1570 before the Common Era to 1544. Ahmose I, founder of the 18th Dynasty and the New Kingdom period, who instantly set about securing and then expanding the borders of Egypt to provide a buffer zone against any further invasions. Later pharaohs, most notably Tutmose III, expanded these buffer zones into an empire. This empire would elevate Kemet's status on the international stage, making her a member of the coalition modern historians call, quote, the Club of Great Powers, along with Assyria, Babylon, and Hittite New Kingdom, and the kingdom of the Mitanni, all of whom participated in trade and diplomatic relationships. The 18th, 19th, and early 20th dynasties brought Kemet to its height of power. But during the latter part of the 20th dynasty, known as the Ramessid period, that power began to wane as the priests of Amun gained greater wealth and influence, and the status of the pharaoh diminished. The power of the cult of Amun can be best appreciated by the size of the temple to the god at Karnak, which every ruler of the new kingdom contributed to. By the end of the new kingdom, there were over 80,000 priests employed by the temple at Thebes, which we know is Waset, alone, not counting other cities in various districts. The most notable of these priests were richer and owned more land than the pharaoh. The unity, and there's Hatshepsut's temple, which is at Karnak. And I got a chance to visit there, and the colossus are amazing. You can see there are a couple of people here in this image, and they are dwarfed by the colossal size of the construction. The unity and strength which characterized the 18th and 19th dynasties steadily was lost during the 20th. The new kingdom ended when the priests of Amun grew strong enough to assert their powers at Thebes and divide the country between this rule and the pharaohs at the city of Per-Ramesses. With the loss of a strong central government and monarch, Kemet entered the era known as the Third Intermediate Period, which is characterized by a steady decline in power and concludes with a Persian invasion of Egypt in 525 before the Common Era. Now, at this particular point, the Persian invasion, what was the date of Alexander the Macedonian? Here, 1 second. I want to put this in context because this 525 before the Common Era coincides very closely with Alexander the Macedonian's entry. Alexander 21, page 21 and to 23. Alexander the Macedonian. I have this in my book. Ooh, not there. I have a chapter on Alexander the Macedonians, and which led to the Nile, conquest of the Nile. Alexander the Macedonian, and here is the thing. Alexander the Macedonian comes in around into Egypt around 330. Well, he's assassinated in 336 before the Common Era at the age of about 29, 30, something, very young man, assassinated at that time. So Alexander the Macedonian was born in 356 before. So the Persians came in at 525 before the Common Era, which meant that their reign would have been 200 years in Kemet. Beginning of the New Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom had been a time of unity and prosperity, which dissolved during the 13th dynasty, so that by circa 1782 before the Common Era, a new power had been able to rise in the north of Egypt, that of the Hyksos. The Hyksos were Semitic peoples who established a seat of power at Avaris in Lower Egypt. That's in the Nile Valley. Not the Nile Valley. Yeah, the Alexandria, that area in the Nile Valley. They established the seat of power of Avaris in Lower Egypt, while at the same time the kingdom of Cush rose in the south in Upper Egypt. These two powers were enabled to establish themselves so firmly because of the neglect of the latter part of the 13th dynasty. The rule of the Hyksos, and to a lesser extent the rise of Cush, characterized the era by which 19th and 20th century Common Era scholars named the Second Intermediate Period. Although Egyptian writers of the New Kingdom and later would characterize the time of the Hyksos as a time of chaos and destruction, the archaeological record as well as evidence from the time show this is a literary exaggeration intended to contrast the greatness of a strong, unified country, such as had prevailed in the New Kingdom, with the disunity that came before it. All evidence points to a cordial, if not warm, relationship between the foreign kings at Avaris and the Egyptian rulers at Waset until the wars broke out, which finally resulted in the expulsion of the Hyksos from Egypt. Further, the Hyksos introduced a number of cultural innovations, especially in warfare, which the Kemetians made use of in building their empires. Scholars Breyer and Hobbes write, however pleased the Egyptians may have been to evict the Hyksos, they owed a great debt to their former occupiers. Egypt learned about chariots and horses from the Hyksos, along with the secret of producing bronze, a metal harder than their copper. Battles against the Hyksos also led Egypt, and I'm quoting them in their original, to look beyond its northern borders for the first time, and with a better equipped arm, eventually to dominate the Middle East. 27, that's a reference to it. And we can see this is the New Kingdom expansion of Kemet. And we understand until the Oxamites and later the, what's the word I'm looking for? The Islamites who conquered, I can't remember the name of the Islamic Empire. Somebody help me out. But the Islamic Empire and now the greater Israel, if you overlap these maps, you'll understand what's happening right now. They're attempting to reconquer all of this and call it greater Israel. They're attempting to conquer, not reconquer. No, not because they were never there in the first place. These Ashkenazis of Europe were never there in ancient Egypt. That's just true. The Sephardim, they could lay claim, but not the Ashkenazi. This is very important. And the word I'm looking for is the Arab conquest of Europe. It was based out of Turkey. And why can I think of it? It was in World War II as well, World War I as well. And I can't think of the name. It is not in this book. So I'm just going to skip it for right now. And Maybe somebody in the chat will help me out. What was the name of the? It lasted up until World War One, and somebody help me out. African Queendom is in the house. Greetings, Kitty. Give thanks for the reasoning and revelation. It's time for us as a people to tell our story and align with African spirituality, powerful truths, intelligence, and way of life. There is an African proverb that says, the truth is like oil. No matter how much water you pour on it, it will always float. Blessings and one love. Is it Anatolia? No, it's not Anatolia. That's not the one I'm thinking of. And I will have it for you in just a second. I'm looking for disaster preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6. And bear with me, everybody. This is a little embarrassing. It's a word I've used so often, and I can't think of it right now. Key hallmarks of the world, root causes of the loss. Ottoman Empire, Ottoman Empire. That's the name of it, the Ottoman Empire. So I want to go back to the map, and this map here is showing us what is close to the so-called Ottoman Empire. Now, if you look at a map of Greater Israel is seeking to conquer that whole area. That will not be allowed to happen. I'm going to go forward. The war with the Hyksos began when the Kemetic king Sequenra, also known as Ta-O, interpreted the message from the Hyksos king Apepi as a challenge and went to war with him. Ta-O was killed, most likely in battle, and the cause was taken up by Kamos of Thebes, probably Ta-O's son, who claimed victory over the Hyksos after destroying the city of Avaris. Later inscriptions from the time and the archaeological record show that Avaris was still a Hyksos stronghold at the time of the next king, Ahmose I, who fought 3 battles to take it and drove the Hyksos first to Palestine and then to Syria. With the defeat of the foreign kings and their expulsion from Kemet, Ahmose I re-established his borders, pushed the Cushites further to the south, unified the country under his rule from the city of Wasat, and thus initiated the period of the New Kingdom. Let's go into the 18th Dynasty. Ahmose I understood that the Hyksos had been able to establish themselves so firmly because they had been allowed by earlier Egyptian monarchs. He therefore decided to create buffer zones around Egypt to secure the borders and fortified neglected settlements at key spots to guard the country. Ahmose I's struggle against the Hyksos brought him and his army into contact with the regions of Palestine and Syria, where he continued his campaigns as well as leading military expeditions south against the kingdom of Cush in Nubia. When he died, he had consolidated his rule and secured the country, leaving a stable political and economic situation for his successor, Amenhotep I, circa 1541 BC to 1520 before the Common Era. Amenhotep I maintained his father's policies and emulated him as a warrior king in inscriptions, but probably only led campaigns in Nubia. There are no records of him leading expeditions into Palestine or Syria, but he may have, since those regions remained secure during his reign, and that of his successor, Amenhotep I, and that of his successor, period. Amenhotep I is best known for his contributions to the arts and religious developments. The Book of Coming Forth by Day, better known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, attained its final form under his reign, and he was the patron of the artist colony at Deir el Medina, the village responsible for work done on the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, where the great pharaohs were buried. And that is a picture from the Book of the Dead, the Book of Neru. And this is in, again, Waset. He concentrated his efforts on creating temples, stelae, and securing the borders, but made no serious attempts at expanding Egypt's territory, Kemet's territory. Upon his death, he was deified as the god of the artisans of Deir el Medina, and was venerated by a funerary cult in his name. He was succeeded by Tutmose I, 1520 to 1492 before the Common Era, who instantly began campaigns to broaden Egypt's Kemet's reach. Tutmose I brought down a rebellion in Nubia, which broke out shortly after he came to the throne, personally killing the Nubian king and hanging his body from the ship's prow as a warning to other rebels. He then expanded Kemet's hold on Nubia further south before turning his attention to Palestine and Syria. He added to the great temple at Karnak, at Thebes, at Waset, and erected numerous other temples and monuments throughout Kemet. He was succeeded by Tutmose II, 1492 to 1479 BCE, about whose reign little is known because he was instantly overshadowed by his more powerful half-sister, Hatshepsut. Tutmose II was the only son of Tutmose I by a lesser queen, while Hatshepsut was Tutmose I's legitimate daughter and, according to her inscriptions, his designated heir. Tutmose II married Hatshepsut to secure his succession after Tutmose's death, but no records survive which suggests he had any real power. He may have ordered military expeditions into Syria, but led none himself. And it is actually thought that these campaigns were commissioned by his half-sister wife. Hatshepsut, 1479 to 1458 before Common Era, is among the most powerful and successful of the New Kingdom monarchs. She had one child with Tutmose II, and he had another by a minor wife whom he designated as successor, Tutmose III, 1458 to 1425 before the Common Era. Hatshepsut was named regent of Egypt upon Tutmose II's death, and ostensibly co-ruled with a child, Tutmose III, but she had been the power behind her husband's reign and continued to do so as she thought best after his death. Hatshepsut is responsible for more building projects than any other Egyptian ruler except for Ramses the Great, 1279 to 1213 before the Common Era. She organized and commissioned the most successful expedition to the land of Punt, contributed to her own works to the temple of Karnak, and ruled in peace with Nubia to the south. Her building projects were so beautiful and so numerous that later pharaohs claimed them as their own. They were able to do this because sometime around 1450 1358 before the Common Era, Hatshepsut's name was removed from all her monuments, including the magnificent complex at Deir el-Bahri. It is unclear why her name was removed or by whom, but it seems that the work of her successor, Tutmose III, who tried to blot out the reign of a female pharaoh in order to maintain the traditional gender roles in the culture. He may have felt that a strong and successful female ruler would empower other women to seek power and so upset the natural balance. Tutmosis III was handed a prosperous and stable nation in 1458 before the Common Era and took no time to begin improving upon it. It is Tutmosis III who creates the Kemetic Empire, which would be maintained by his successors. He used the war chariot inherited from the Hyksos, as well as bronze weapons and superior tactics to defeat the surrounding nations and expand Kemet's domain further than it had ever reached in the past. In 20 years, Tutmosis III led at least 17 different military campaigns, subduing kingdoms from Libya to Syria into Kemetic subjects and extending Kemet's control in the south from the area around Buhen down to Kyrgyz. His inscriptions and monuments tell his story so completely. He is regarded as one of the best documented rulers in Egyptian history after Ramesses II. Now, again, go to your Christian or Hebrew brothers and ask them who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, Moses, and all of that. When did it happen? This is saying he was one of the most well-documented rulers in Kemetic history after Ramesses II. And of course, he predates Ramesses II. He was succeeded by his son, Amenhotep II, who, like his father, inherited a strong and secure kingdom and improved on it. He was not as active in military campaigns as his father had commissioned numerous building projects and concluded peace treaties and trade documents with other nations, such as the Mitanni. His successor, Tutmose V, from 1400 BC to 1390 before the Common Era, continued his policies. Tutmose VI is considered a usurper, even though he is the legitimate son of Amenhotep II, based upon interpretations of this famous dream stele, which tell the story of how he came to the throne. He is best known as the pharaoh who restored the great Sphinx at Giza. That is the great Harmaku, is it? Harmaku, that's the name, I think. I'm pretty sure that's the name, yeah. Haramaku. He is succeeded by Amenhotep III, 1386 to 1353 before the Common Era, who was also considered one of the most successful and powerful rulers of Kemet. Amenhotep III reigned over Kemet at one of its highest points culturally, politically, and economically. His reign is among the most opulent in the history of Kemet, and he consistently used his wealth in dealings with other countries to coax them into doing what he wanted. He maintained a stable rule of the country, expanded its borders, and devoted himself to the arts and building projects. Many of the most impressive Egyptian Kemetic monuments come from his reign. During this time, however, the priests of Amun began to acquire more and more wealth. They owned more land than the king and made use of it to further enrich themselves. Amenhotep III tried to quell their growing power by aligning himself with a minor god, Aten, represented by a sun disk. It seems he thought the power of Pharaoh behind the cult of Aten would increase the prestige of those priests at the expense of those of Amun. His plan did not work, but it did elevate the god of Aten, who would feature prominently in the reign of Amenhotep's son and successor. Amenhotep IV is better known as Akhenaten, 1353 to 1336 before the Common Era, the pharaoh famous for instituting monotheism in Kemet and banishing the old gods. The time of his reign has come to be known as the Amun-Ra period because the Egyptian Kemetic capital was moved from Waset to modern-day Amun-Ra. Amarna, that's what I'm trying to say. He came to the throne of Amenhotep as Amenhotep IV, but in the fourth or fifth year of his reign, changed his name to Akhenaten, established the old religion, especially the cult of Amun, and elevated the god Aten to the position of the one true God. Only the cult of Aten was viewed as a legitimate religious body. All the temples to the other gods were closed and their worship prescribed. At the great temple of Amun at Karnak, which he also closed, he erected a temple to Aten. Akhenaten moved the capital from Thebes, Waset, to a new city he had built, Akhenaten, to which he retired and largely neglected affairs of state. His wife was the famous Nefertiti, circa 1370 to 1336 before the Common Era, best known for the magnificent bust created by the sculptor Tutmose. And there is great reason to suspect that this statue of, or this bust of Queen Nefertiti is actually a fraud created by the excavators of the tombs later years. I would defer to Professor that's my brother too. Why am I having a hard time? Menu Ampem, Professor Menu Ampem, who's done a lot of research on the bust of Nefertiti. He calls it a fraud. Akhenaten's reforms have long been regarded as a sincere effort at religious reformation, but may have simply been his most effective solution to the problem of the growing power of the cult of Amun. As noted, the priests of Amun were a cause of concern to Akhenaten's father, whose efforts at curbing the cult failed. Akhenaten effectively neutralized the power of the priests by outlawing their cult and banishing their god. And I do see you in the house, Stray Godzilla. He says, Katie, greetings to you, my brother. Upon Akhenaten's death, he was succeeded by his young son, Tutankhaten, who quickly changed his name to Tutankhamun, removed the capital back to Memphis, restored the religious center of Thebes, which has also held political significance, reopened the temples, and brought back the old religion to Egypt. Although he initiated important reforms which stabilized the country, he is best known for his magnificent tomb discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, the Tomb Raider. Tutankhamun was married to his half-sister, Ankhesenamun, until his death at approximately the age of 18 years old. He said, you remember the twins in Long Beach? Been rocking for decades. Yeah, man, long time and I hear from you, man. Woo, Long Beach, that's 30, 40 years ago, 30 some years ago. It's been a while, but we still going strong. I hope you do. Bookmark me. Come on back every day and talk to me. We're also, our main site is on Rumble as LIB Radio. So you can always go to Rumble because many of the health related programming we do not push it up on YouTube because they will censor us. And eventually they cut off my old page. That's a whole nother story. Upon Akhenaten's death, he was succeeded by his young son Tutankhaten, who quickly changed his name to Tutankhamun. Going forward, Ankhenamun may have then married the vizier A, possibly 1324 to 1320, who, according to some scholars, succeeded Tutankhamun, or she may have tried to rule on her own. A letter from her to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma, there was too many syllables, Suppiluliuma the first, asked for one of his sons in marriage, to whom she would make an Egyptian king. This son was sent by the king, was murdered upon reaching Egypt, Kemet. As it has been suggested, this was carried out either by I or Horemheb. Whatever role I played in the succession, Ankhenamun vanishes shortly after Tutankhamun's death, and the general Horemheb came to power, devoting himself to restoring Egypt to her former glory, restoring Kemet to her former glory. Horemheb went to great lengths to wipe the Amarna period kings from Egyptian history by destroying all the monuments and inscriptions of Akhenaten, including demolishing his temple at Karnak so thoroughly that no trace was left of it. The only way later historians learned of Akhenaten's reforms was because Horemheb used the ruined monuments, stelae, and inscriptions as fill-in for other projects. Horemheb championed the old religion and the traditions of ancient Egypt, of ancient Kemet. Under Akhenaten's reign, relationships with other nations and the infrastructure of Kemet itself had been neglected. Horemheb restored Egypt, Kemet, to its former stature, even though he could not raise it to the height it had known earlier under Amenhotep III. He died without an heir and was succeeded by his vizier Parames, who took the throne, named Ramses I, who began the 19th Dynasty. So it goes on, and I hope that you have had your curiosity stirred today. I hope that you will come to this story. I'm posting up links to where one can get the story to retell it. We need to find a way inside the Christian churches. We need to find a way inside the Christian churches. We need to retell the story, to reclaim the story, better yet. So I'm going to post up this link and just thank you all for tuning in today. What did you think? Do you think this story is as compelling as I claim it to be? I bet you do. I just posted up the last link to the new kingdom, no, not the new kingdom, to the 18th Dynasty. Learn more about the 18th Dynasty. Real important. The New Kingdom and the 18th Dynasty. That's very important. So I want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in today. I did quote from two of my books, Standard Omission, The African Scientific Roots of Greco-Roman Medicine. And I also did quote from this other book, Disaster Preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6, to show how this evolution continues up to modern times through the Ottoman Empire. So if we understand this, I think personally, we have ground to move forward. And on that note, did I just post in what happened there? I don't know. I posted a link about the 18th dynasty. One more time. 18th dynasty. New kingdom. That's what I'm trying to say. And on that note, I'm going to wrap it up for today. The new kingdom. Capitalize it. Come on. Don't mess with me. So you've been tuned into LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livingblack.com. Over the weekend, I have increased the appeal to you who have been loyal listeners. You're with me all the time. You've been loyal listeners to increase your support. I've been doing this for 22 years. It's almost impossible to do this alone. Many of you know this. A number of you do support. And you do support us very well. But it's far, 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 far from what is needed. As it is right now, I have ambitions to carry all of this knowledge that I have amassed in 22 years. We're talking about 65, 70,000 hours worth of LIB radio. And I've been planning on building villages, 3 villages, to house these archives, but better yet, to live what we have been saying, to teach everyone who wants to learn about Kemet. Come spend a weekend at the Kujichagulia village in Ghana or Kenya, Uganda, perhaps also in this country. We tried establishing it in this country, and essentially, I think we failed. I can't say we have failed because I haven't heard back from Baba Khalifa, who we invested a lot of time building out there at Khalifa's Kujichagulia village, is what it was called. I love Baba Khalifa. I love the people who came out and helped us build. We built gardens and orchards and handcrafted and invented things. We invented a solar dehydrator and our own version of the picnic table, which we called the mesa. What was it called? Sikusu. I can't remember the name of his Swahili name. Sikusi Mesa, something like that. We did a lot of great things, but we now need our greatness to come forward ever more as these MAGA forces that have taken over DC, they're going buck wild crazy. We're going to have to find us a place where we can pull aside and say, I am no longer of them. They can do what they will, but not against us. We're going to have to do something, people, serious. I'm very concerned that our people are not prepared to declare independence. I am really concerned. We're going to do the best we can. And hopefully that will be much, much better than what we have been doing. I want to thank you all for tuning in. You've been tuned into LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Thank you all for all you do for all of us. We are truly a great and glorious people. We've come a long way together. But oh, yet we've got so much further to go. On this, your favorite, we aim to be your favorite. We are LIB Radio, LIB TV. We are livinginblack.com. Peace and prosperity to each and every one of you.